Thank you, Priyasha. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this particular gathering and this seminar is of seminal importance to all of us here. It addresses a region that has been looked at from so many different lenses that we thought that it would be a good idea to try and combine as many of these perspectives and points of view as is possible. And even as I welcome you, therefore, to what I'm sure will be a day of exploration into these multifaceted lenses, I think that it would be important if we were to ask ourselves how maritime spaces per se are perceived and manifest themselves in the contemporary international order, and then examine some transformative effects that occur when nation states interact with these maritime spaces. Now, in actual fact, India itself is relatively understudied from a maritime lens, and so too is the case with a large number of countries that are even more islandic in their geographical conformation than is India. India is to all intents and purposes, an island nation. I rather fear that we lack an adequate amount of islanders. And in other countries that are of the greater Bay of Bengal region, the number of islanders are many. Sometimes the island is not quite ready to absorb so many islanders. How then ought we to capture the norms, the beliefs, the values of each of these states that surround the Bay of Bengal or are washed by its waters? The range is large, and we are singularly privileged to have a set of interlocutors throughout the day that will hopefully guide us through the many labyrinthine corridors of the mind that exist as we examine this maritime space. The fact that we have Her Excellency the High Commissioner of Sri Lanka in our midst is only an additional jewel in the crown that has been crafted so carefully by Professor Hindol Sengupta, who's sitting there on my left, and who has crafted many such crowns in the course of his very distinguished career, of which we will speak by and by. But given the huge dependence, for example, of India upon its maritime spaces in general and upon the Bay of Bengal in particular, it is important for us, even in the welcoming segment of this particular day, to remember that state imaginations of how we look at spaces, how we examine them, how we internalize them, and how we externalize them are products of at least three variables. The first is the state's interpretation of history, and that is linked with the spaces around it. The second comprises the state's intentions vis-a-vis the opportunities that it sees. And the third, of course, are the material capabilities and capacities of the state. In the traditional fashion, we tend to look at these in isolation. Either we talk about culture, or we talk about security, or we talk about economics. And then we seldom realize that geopolitics is actually the amalgamation of each of these elements. And there is no ability that we have or should have of being able to segregate geopolitics, geoeconomics, and geostrategy and place them in one horizontal typological plane, because one is a subset of the other. And yet, when we look at the amount of interest that there is in the Bay of Bengal, within India, we are encouraged. There are centers of Bay of Bengal studies extending from Assam and extending all the way to Nalanda University. There is the O.P. Jindal and Global Order, which has a reasonable amount of focus upon this very area. And I'm very privileged to say that the National Maritime Foundation, too, is in the vanguard of this particular exploration. How then should we welcome you adequately? Firstly, what are the frills that we should adopt? I personally think that you are here because of your established expertise, because of your established interest, and your acumen in many of these areas. We are very privileged to have with us the international liaison officers who are here from the IFC IOR. We have officers and senior functionaries from the National Defense College, from the National Maritime Security Coordinator's Office, and of course we have very senior guides and philosophers and mentors of ours. I would like to recognize in this regard Commodore Ranjit Rai, who has long been a proponent of looking at maritime security holistically. And I say this word maritime security with a certain amount of trepidation as well, because I fear that every time we use this, we tend to fly off into military maritime security alone. And yet, the fact that each of you is here present today, whether you come from a security background or an economic one or a diplomatic one, or for that matter, a cultural one, is reflective of the fact that you find a need for us to be able to exchange views, amalgamate views, and come to a consolidated whole of imagination. History, ladies and gentlemen, will forgive us for many, many things, but one thing history will not forgive us for, and that is failures of imagination. And if we cannot imagine spaces more holistically than merely looking at them from a single lens, then we would be guilty of quite such a failure. It is not my intention to belabor any of these topics. It is my intention certainly to afford you a very warm and heartfelt welcome to this seminar, and I hope that you will participate actively in as much as the experts here have brought and will bring together perspectives that you possibly would need to reflect upon. Be agitated. Try and not have too much good order and naval discipline. Try and be untidy. The more untidy we are, the better will be our engagement. The more structured and formal we are, the poorer we will be for it. So with those somewhat contradictory remarks, let me reaffirm the fact that we are over the moon with joy to see as many of you as there are here today, and that I can promise you that we will be able to put together a presentation set, a conversational set, in which you will not be passive listeners, but in which you will be participants in every respect. With those few words, I would like to once again, for the third time, welcome each and every one of you, and tell you that hang on to your seats, since we haven't been allowed to give you seat belts, but the day is an exciting one. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It is now my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to invite Professor Hindol Sengupta, Director, Global Order, to deliver the seminar overview.
Thank you so much. There are many people to thank here, but I must begin by thanking Rear Admiral Mukul Asthana many months ago, when the idea of this conference first began. The first person I spoke to is Mukul Asthana ji. He, of course, is part of our distinguished board of advisors, which, of course, Mr. Akbar chairs. He gave me a lot of guidance and gave Global Order a lot of guidance and assistance. And indeed, it is he who put us through to the National Maritime Foundation and to Admiral Chauhan. That was the inception that brought us here. So a special thank you to you, sir. Thanks very much for your help. I also want to thank Admiral Chauhan and the National Maritime Foundation. Like a persistent lover, I had to woo them for many, many months, as Admiral Chauhan knows, among many, many emails and messages to him to make this happen. But I have to say, when Admiral Chauhan decided it had to be done, it was done in the characteristic gusto that NMF does things. I thank you, sir, for your cooperation, for your help, support, and helping this happen. Thanks very much. My special thanks, and I'm going to begin my small statement here by something Mr. Akbar told me, I tend to meet Mr. Akbar to take guidance on many things, and one of the things the last time I was sitting with him to talk about this and many other things was, Mr. Akbar said that the war is coming to our waters, and I think that cannot be a more pertinent and powerful point on which to begin today's proceedings. I think of myself, ladies and gentlemen, as in some senses, as a professor, I teach my students that the personal is the historical and the historical is the geopolitical. All of these three things talk to one another. I think of myself in some senses as a child of the waters of the Bay of Bengal. Because I, of course, my family comes from the other side. In Bengali, we say Opar Bangla. Both my parents' side come from the other side. We are Bangals, as the Bengalis would say. We are from what is today Bangladesh. And some of my ancestors, when the riots happened dividing our country, hid among the marshes and the waters of Bengal to escape death. So in many senses, I think of myself as a child of the waters of the Bay of Bengal. I'm reminded, of course, that even the literature and around this, not just of course the geopolitical literature, but also the literature of people like Amitav Ghosh talks about the hungry tide. I'm remembering his book this morning. There is a hungry tide in these waters today, ladies and gentlemen. The contestation is growing. Of course, all of you know that India has a major plan to build the Great Nicobar initiative, the Great Nicobar project, which will be one of the biggest transshipment projects that India will do, and indeed one of the biggest in the world. There are many questions that, in a sense, are swirling in these waters, and there has never been a better time. There has also been a big election in the state of Bengal. All of you are aware of this. There has never been a better time than to organize such a conference, and I am very, very delighted, especially Excellency, that you have taken time to come and join us. I'm particularly grateful for your time. Thanks very much. Ambassador, thanks very much for your time. All of you distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm very grateful. Global Order, just in summation, is our initiative to build a truly global organization that looks at geopolitics, but from an Indian perspective, from our part of the world, so to speak. And we've done many things, and hopefully we will do many more. I'm particularly taken by Admiral Chauhan's idea that we must build a maritime consciousness. So hopefully we will do many more things together, and I won't have to woo him again. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen.
There is, of course, the difference between being wooed and married.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my privilege to invite Mr. M.J. Akbar, former Minister of State for External Affairs, to deliver the commemorative address.
Thank you very much, Admiral Chauhan. Thank you very much, Hindol. Just going by the remarks that have already been made, if we want to understand how dynamic the world If you want to begin to understand how dynamic the world has become, all you have to do is to see how fast the world has changed from the time this conference was conceived and the time that it is actually happening. There are many things which are not going to be mentioned, but judging by the political transformation of the East, I may be bold enough to say, without elaboration, that for the first time in memory, we might be able to create the strategic architecture of security in the East impediment, but without much impediment. We are meeting on the morning when President Trump has reached Beijing. And this, I'm referring to you because this is going to be the theme of my presentation. that what we are witnessing already, which you hinted at, is the war of the five seas searching for a sixth. And just to add a little to your thought process before we continue, don't think of Ukraine as a land alone. Ukraine began with Crimea in 2014. President Trump began the war in Hormuz on certain assumptions. When I think this trip to Beijing was planned, which was planned for March, he expected to reach Beijing with Venezuela in one pocket and Iran in the other. Instead, he is landing there as a sub. He may have said that he doesn't want China to intervene in Iran, but he also added that he would like China to become active. And then Marco Rubio made what was very clear. He said China should play a role in resolving the war. Just before he left, his officials told the US Congress that 30 of the 33 Iranian missile launch pads were still perfectly safe, that the war had at a very minimum cost the Americans $29 trillion. He did not add that 13 American bases in the region had been destroyed, and so on and so forth. I don't need to elaborate. These facts are known. But let me tell you a fact which may have escaped your attention. And this brings me to the point, because I think Admiral Chauhan, you said that we look at the seas from many different angles. Let me point out that my worry is different. My worry is that the seas are invisible when it comes to strategic planning. Nobody sees the seas. Nobody sees Crimea. They all look at the Kiev. What is this war about? This is the first declared war for oil and water, because oil is impotent without water. Trade is prohibitive without water. And when I talk of invisibility, I'm going to refer you to the interview which we probably must have come across. It was an interview given by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to American channel, in which he said something which I think has escaped everyone's attention, but which utterly startled. He said that when the war began, Israel and America never factored in that Iran might use Hormuz as a strategic weapon. And I wondered, how could you not factor that? How could he possibly not factor? Today, we are equally invisible to the Malacca Straits. The shadow of Hormuz is already on Malacca. And while it may not have become a hot war, the Taiwan Straits are waiting to explode. And this conflict is going to take dimensions which we have not yet begun to fully recognize. The war in Iran, the war against Iran, America's war against Iran, did not start on 28th February this year. It started in 1979. It started in 79 because in 79 two major events happened in 1979 which persuade me to believe that the start of the 21st century is actually 1979. First, after the big American strategic success, otherwise known as Camp David, in which America neutralized the Soviet influence in the region, in the Gulf, it brought Egypt, which was the major military power at the time and still is, although it has become a dormant power. It had brought Anwar Sadat's Egypt into the American fold. For the first time, the oil flows, the energy flows, and then the energy pricing through OPEC of that whole region was under American control. Influence, if you don't like the word control. But it was certainly part of America's view of how the world should be run, and particularly how energy should be run. The sudden rise of the Islamic Republic in 1979 took everyone by surprise. The second surprise was that the Iranian Revolution succeeded in its first year in establishing a government when it could easily have been destroyed by the many other players within the revolution. But they survived that. Imam Khomeini established a government, and then the government began to function. Then the government took Americans hostage. The government was hyped up. The challenge to America in the name of oil pricing, among other things. This 1979 movement, the first war for regime change. You keep hearing of regime change. I sometimes wonder if the regime will change in Tel Aviv and Washington before it changes in Tehran. But that's another story. The first attempt at regime change took place in 1980, and it was done through Saddam Hussein. In 1980, Iraq attacked with the coordinated help of the Americans and the financing of the Saudis. That war continued for 8 years. Iran did not have an army then, because the Shah's army had withered. But they showed a resilience which people seem to forget. They showed an ability. In fact, Ayatollah Khamenei, who was assassinated, first earned his spurs fighting in the trenches of that war. That war took 8 years, and it ended with the return of the status quo ante, as we say. This one will also end up there, status quo ante. Whereas the Iranians put it in Hormuz, it is either free for everyone or free for no one. In 1979, also to give you a parallel story, the Soviets made their historic mistake, historic blunder, when they invaded Afghanistan. The consequences of that are a different story, not part of this seminar, but that ended the Soviet Union, leading to consequences which had a major play on our subcontinent, because the American need for Pakistan was renewed because of that invasion, and that gave wind to Pakistan's generals to renew their war against India, this time through terrorism. But before I go back to my subject, I would like to remind you of a statement made by Mrs. Margaret Thatcher. This was made in 1981 when Israel, actually, despite the alliance with Iraq, Israel used that environment to bomb Osiris, which was Iraq's nuclear facility, once again under the pretext of destroying any potential weapons of mass destruction. And I think a lady who can be now considered one of the wisest conservative voices of the past half century, Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, told the Jewish Chronicle, and seeking the Jewish Chronicle to say this is itself significant. She said on the Israel attack that if you destroy the international rules-based order, you will get international anarchy. And we are heading towards that, but not preparing for it. Or not, we were not, we are now. And I'll come to that later. Which are the 5 C's? If you change the perspective of the Ukraine war, the 5 C's that are actively engaged in war at the moment are the Mediterranean, the Black Sea. These are lands of the Mediterranean. The Black Sea, Caspian, which is Iran, Red Sea, which is Houthis, Aden. Don't forget, the most dangerous strait is not Hormuz. The most dangerous strait is Bab al-Mandeb, the Gate of Tears. It's called Gate of Tears because for centuries people have died there. It's on the Horn of Africa, it's in Yemen. That is the key region. The war has not even reached it. When it does, wait and prepare for energy prices and austerity of $200 and $300. So, the Red Sea, the Arabian Sea, if you think that the lands of the Arabian Sea, and look at the littoral states of the region. Don't think of war only as what is in the headlines. On 11th of May this year, which is how many days before? How many of you are aware that Jordan bombed Syria? Boundaries are gone. It may be now slipping in the back of your consciousness that now Pakistan has made bombing Afghanistan a regular feature and Afghanistan is responding. So there is active war going on there. I'm just telling you about the range of conflict which has already happened. It's not waiting to happen. Sri Lanka will tell you that a ship was destroyed on its shores. So how long do you have, where do you have to wait for the war to come to the Indian Ocean? The Indian Navy is patrolling on the Red Sea. Why? Because for the first time we have moved away. This is the strength of what has not yet been called, but what will eventually, I think, be called the Modi Doctrine, which is that for the first time, I think, since whenever, to say that also becomes controversial, so I won't say it. But for the first time, we are now have a forward security strategy. For a long while, India's security was trapped in a very British doctrine, first articulated by John Lawrence, Governor General after 1857, when the Russian expansion in Central Asia mounted. And from, I think, 1864 to 1879, this was the policy of the British. It was known as masterly inactivity. Whenever you don't want to do anything, just add masterly to it and it will look sufficiently. For a long while, I'm afraid, the government of India's bureaucracy believed in masterly inactivity as its preferred policy. And its political class thought that was the wisest way forward because it saved you on budget, gave you funds for doing other things. But this masterly inactivity has happened. We are not only developing the Nicobar case, which I think is well known, certainly to this room. We are developing it because Malacca can be our partners if we have the sufficient strength to provide the security at the western gates of the Malacca. Indonesia can be the equivalent of Oman out there. And we can work in cooperation to maintain the right of free passage. And in fact, those who are attacking our base in Nicobar, I consider them to be seriously even anti-national. This has also happened because Prime Minister Modi has changed the meaning of neighbor. For a long while, India's policy was trapped to the west by Pakistan. Became imbued for a long while. We were trapped in the Himalayas by our needs, legitimate needs, to protect ourselves against China. And then, of course, the conflicts that Pakistan has started from 1946. But the meaning of neighbor was changed. I think Vajpayee ji said, and he said something which I think all of us consider to be common sense, which is that you can change friends but you can't change neighbors. It's a sort of given assumption. Prime Minister Modi actually proved you can change neighbors. How can you change neighbors? By redefining them. You no longer define neighbors by geography, you define them by reach. If I can't reach you, you are not my neighbor. Just look at it like a Bombay high-rise. Who knows the name of the next door neighbor? In a village, everybody knows. Because you can reach them. So if we can't reach Pakistan, Pakistan is not a neighbor. It is just a problem and a presence. Who is our neighbor? Very simple. Every week there are 1,000 flights to the Gulf. You can't get a ticket. Right? There is no flight to Pakistan. And if there was, you could get a ticket. So who is my neighbor? Nothing to do with Muslim and Hindu. The Gulf is Muslim. Who is man? I was in Malaysia recently and I was surprised to find that there's a Malaysian airline which has a flight to every virtually semi-small town. Huge town, some 30 towns across the country. So who is my neighbor? Malaysia? Or this Western presence? Once we change the arc of neighborhood, our neighborhood now, in both real terms and strategic terms, extends from Hormuz and the Gulf up to Malacca. That is the arc of India's neighborhood. And that is the arc, perimeter of India's immediate defense, priority and security line. I think it's no longer forward, it's the real active security line. And once we were able to wait, we have now become what people have always forgotten, and I urge our friends in the Navy to mention this as often as possible. One of the oldest sayings, descriptions of India, is that India is not only the land south of the mountains, it is the land north of the waters. And for the first time now, we are beginning to implement a policy which is based on India being land north of the waters. Just remember one thing. Why is the Indian Ocean called the Indian Ocean? And this is not a name which has been invented in the last 10 years. It's called the Indian Ocean because of India's predominant place in these waters historically from the most ancient times. Why did the British in 1772 in their map say Bay of Bengal, which is what we are discussing? Because Bengal was the source. The trade from Bengal made the waters of Bay of Bengal into a strategic asset. Murshidabad was once one of the richest cities of the country, if not the richest city of the country. The British were in, Kutch for a long while and Surat for a long while. Then they discovered that the place to be in was Bengal for trade and commerce, not elsewhere. So this resurgence of India's sense of itself, this resurgence of India's understanding of itself, this resurgence of India's understanding that the Nicobar is only 100 kilometers or so away from the western gate of Malacca. Otherwise, Andamans and Nicobar were not even within our, geographical sense of ourselves, consciousness of ourselves. These are very remarkable changes. And remember that the search for the sixth sea is because the sixth sea, going right up to the China Sea, is volatile. China has already set a calendar for the absorption, if you like, of Taiwan, which will fundamentally change not only the geopolitics, but it will change the economics of the region, and that is a conflict from which Japan cannot be excluded. Japan has already begun arming itself, which is a fact which may have escaped your notice, and it has done so after the Iran war. 80% of China's energy imports go through the Malacca. So China is not quiet as it watches us strengthen itself in the region. And in fact, those who are raising voices against our strength in that region fear that suspicions are arising about their motives. The nature of war itself has changed dramatically. In fact, mention of Taiwan reminds me that in 1958 Taiwan crisis was the first time or second time that the America and NATO diverged from each other. The first time was Suez. The second time was during the Taiwan crisis when Macmillan told Eisenhower openly that Europe was not ready for a world war. Europe had many things ravaged by them. And the cost of invasion was unacceptable to trade. That thing is still here. Almost the cost of invasion is unacceptable to the trade. In fact, some of the Chinese doctrines of the time are becoming very, very relevant now. Some of the Mao's theories of war I'm just mentioning it to you so that you might think about it. That at that moment, China was desperate to get attention because it was not recognized. So he set off this maximum, fire a few cannon in order to get their attention. It's draw the bow, don't discharge the arrow. That's what Iran has done extremely successfully, choosing which arrow to use at which point. The Mao Noose strategy is something again. But the most important thing is the Chinese doctrine, which I think you will see. Zheng, Junxi, Jiang, fighting and talking go together. And this is what you will see develop because this war is unlikely to end. The nature of war has changed from continuous to continual. War will see pauses. I think whatever pause you will see after whichever negotiations take place, you will see re-emergence of some form of conflict before too soon. In fact, if they had understood, if the Americans had understood the meaning of water, on 20th October morning when they attacked Tehran, they would have simply sent 3,000 troops and taken over Kharkov, which was undefended. Right? Because they could not see water, I think they missed the chance of. War will continue under what fluid lines, protracted war. Countries will use strategies of secession, retreat, attack. It will be very, very unconventional. And the challenge before us strategic thinkers is how to deal with the unconventional. Just before I end, I may link up the land and sea and why we are facing, after the 20th century's world wars, why we are facing a worldwide war rather than a world war. Ukraine from Eurasia. How far is Chechnya from Ukraine? And don't think that the Chechnya wars has finished. It's Delhi and Haryana, not more than that. How far is Chechnya from Caucasus? You don't need a lesson of how disturbed Caucasus is. How is Caucasus from the Kurds and Erbil? How far is Erbil from Iraq? It's probably technically a part of Iraq. And ISIS, how far is that from Syria, where everyone is fighting? Nobody quite knows who's fighting. Then Syria to Lebanon, Lebanon to Palestine, Palestine, Israel, Yemen, Pakistan, Afghanistan. God forbid Pakistan becomes adventurous again and tempts the Indian frontiers of Kashmir. We don't know. Last year they did Sindhu, right? And right up to these, across these troubled waters, up to Taiwan. And you're looking at a time of extreme danger, extreme caution, and a time when the leaders of the world must also understand that they are living in the space between the death of one world, the world that was created in 1946, based on the sovereignty of nations as the building block of the architecture of security. Two, that world is dead. And it is dead because the guardians of security have become marauders. The United Security Council has members who are no longer respect sovereignty. That world is dead. The next is not born. We are trapped in between. And in this violent trap, we have to use the word which I'm sure admirals would like, navigate through sharks and shoals. Thank you.
May I now request Admiral Chauhan to present a token of our appreciation to Mr. M.J. Akbar.
You know, sir, you have so eloquently painted the picture of the geopolitical arena in which we must navigate. And what better symbol can I offer you than a lifeboat?
मैम थोड़ा साइड में प्लीज स्टील